So welcome everyone to our second lecture on the Kuzari. Um, the we Our last lecture we introduced the book mostly by discussing Rabbi Yehuda Halevi and his life. Today we're going to actually start the book. Now, because I don't have there's no a single authoritative accepted text that everybody likes. I had to kind of um, choose which one to use. So for the English version, because most of the people here's first language is English, I recommended the Rabbi Korobkin's version, and there's several printings out there. The one that's I think the most available today is this one, and he has an English translation. If you have that book, then it starts at page 47 where the actual text starts, and it's called Ma'amar Rishon, the first essay. Now, the Korobkin uses you'll see there's Hebrew next to the English in this version. The Hebrew is actually the original, the first translation by Rabbi Yehuda ibn Tibbon that was translated about a generation or two after Rabbi Yehuda Halevi wrote the book. He translated it into Hebrew, and then Rabbi Korobkin's English translation is a translation of that translation, right? Now, in modern times, several scholars have went back to the original Arabic, the original Judeo-Arabic in which the book was written, and have retranslated it, and and have written it over in a better, much more readable Hebrew, and much more modern Hebrew, and a much more historically accurate, and just the translations read much nicer. We could have several classes on the Ibn Tibbon family and the incredible amount of work they did in doing translations, but that's not the point for today. But just the Hebrew that I'm going to be reading from, and I promise, and you guys should be able to follow along in the English. But the one I'm going to be reading from is, I've seen several Hebrew translations, and the most easy to read and translated directly from the Judeo-Arabic is this version, which it was written by Michael Schwartz. It came out maybe I don't know, maybe 20-30 years ago, and into a modern Hebrew, and it's such a beautiful read that's why I chose this one. So it'll be a little confusing, but we've kind of done this with the Rambam too, where I was reading one translation. We do this with my Mesilat Yesharim class for those that come on Tuesdays, where I read one translation and everyone around the table and online on Zoom has another translation, because there's 10 different ones. So either way, sometimes the different translations, each one can give a little bit of a different angle. So it might actually enhance the discussion. If you guys are following in one and I'm reading in another, it can enhance the discussion if we see different ways of translating things. So let's begin the book. Just remember, well, you don't have to remember anything. We're going to let Rabbi Yehuda Halevi speak for himself. Okay, that's and that's really what my own personal philosophy in all of these classes I'm giving is. I truly want to do my best to convey what the author of these very classic and monumental and influential beyond words. The books that I've chosen to teach, the Moreh Nevuchim before, the Mesilat Yesharim, which I'm doing now, and this book, the Kuzari, have been incredibly influential in the development of our religion, the way Jews think of our religion, the way we approach it, the way we understand it. This book, the Kuzari, was designed to be popular. He wrote it in order to tell Jews what Judaism is, and he couched it and wrote it as part of a story, as part of a pseudo fictional story based on a somewhat historical event of the king of the Khazar's conversion to Judaism. And just remember, and I talked about this last week. The time was a time when the Jews were the smallest group, caught between two giant world religions, Islam and Christianity, both of whom were at war with each other, constant war with each other. People were constantly killing each other. He was in Spain at a time when every week the Muslims conquered and the Christians conquered, and the Muslims conquered and the Christians conquered, and every conquering was was accompanied by a bloodbath, and the Jews were caught in the middle. We talked about his own life. The Jews were caught in the middle. One day they run to the Christians for safety, and then they run to the Muslims for safety, and then they run to the Christians, then they run to the Muslims. Nowhere to go. But the kings, the leaders, would supposedly be battling on behalf of their religion. So the idea that there was a king somewhere in the world of a powerful kingdom who chose Judaism was just a spectacular idea. Now, there was a letter that the Chasdai ibn Shaprut, who was one of the great Jewish leaders of the 10th century, so about a century before Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, had written a letter to the king of the Khazars, a king whose name was Joseph. Yosef, the king of the Khazar, of the Kuzarim, right, of the Khazars. And he asked him about, who you are, what's your story, where do you come from, what's your Judaism like, etc. And Joseph wrote a letter back. You can find this letter. It's available, a long letter in which he told a lot of stories about the history of Khazaria and their Judaism, etc. In that, most of the sources that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi had about Khazaria was from that letter that was written by Joseph, the king of Khazaria, to Chasdai ibn Shaprut about a century before. So what we're about to read, the story we're about to read, is based on the stories that were transmitted from this King Joseph, who was the king of Khazaria about a century before Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's life. So, and forgive me, I'm going to read the Hebrew only because it helps keep me grounded in the text, and it keeps me on target for staying as faithful to what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi wants us to hear, as opposed to what Saul Weinreb wants us to hear. Okay, that's how I stay grounded, and that's why I read the text, and I don't just say it in my own words. But try to follow along in your English, and if you have another Hebrew version and you're comfortable in the Hebrew, then follow along in your Hebrew. Gesundheit. If you have French or Spanish, do that too. Just try to follow along with me, and you'll see the ideas as they move along. So Nishalti al odos hatiunim sheyesh li neged mitnagdenu hafilosofim mi'anshei hadatot. I have been asked, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says, to describe our refutations or our answers, right, against our enemies, those that believe other belief systems than us, the philosophers and those of other religions. People ask me, what do the Jews have to say about blah, 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 blah? The philosophers say this, and the Muslims say this, and the Christians, well, what do the Jews say, right? Not just by other religions are asking me what do the Jews say, but people that are among the Jews that don't want to be part of our community, and they come to me and they say, well, what do the Jews have to say? What's the Jews' opinion on XYZ? So, because I've been asked, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says, what is the Jews' opinion? Nizkarti, I remembered something that I heard about the opinions as expressed by the Chaver. The Chaver is the rabbi, the Jewish scholar who was asked by the king of the Khazars to present Judaism to him, to present the basics of Judaism to him. The king of the Khazars. And when did he do this? Asher haya etzel melech hakuzarim. The Chaver, that's the Jewish rabbi, the scholar who was with the king of the Khazars, shekibel alav et Yudim, which we know that the king of the Khazars accepted upon himself the religion of the Jews. Lifnei ka'arba me'el shana, approximately 400 years ago. Historically, it's debatable. We don't know exactly when the Khazar kingdom converted, but the historical consensus is that it was somewhere in the mid-9th century. So it was really only about 100 or 200 years before Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. But regardless, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi thought it was 400 years ago. We still don't really know now either. So we don't even know if he's wrong or right, whatever. Regardless, as it appears in the books of the Chronicles and the history books. And presumably the books he's referring to, the only known book that we know of is the letter that I mentioned in the beginning that was written by Yosef, the king of the Khazars, to Chasdai ibn Shaprut about 100 years prior to the life of Yehuda Halevi. So that's where we know that most of information would have come from that letter. Shenishna lo chalom, we know that the king had a dream that kept on reappearing to him. Now, before I read the story of the king's dream, I want to point out a few things. And almost anyone that discusses Rabbi Yehuda Halevi today and his philosophy contrasts it with the philosophy that we learned together in the previous course on the Moreh Nevuchim of the Rambam, right? And the differences between the two, and so on and so forth. It's going to be impossible for me to resist myself from showing often and how XYZ, whatever we're studying, is different than we saw in the Rambam. So forgive me for doing that. I apologize, but I'm just going to do it because that's just me. However, right away off the top, those of you that were with us when we studied the Rambam should have noticed something that is dramatically different from how Rambam's approach would have been. Right? In his first sentence, he said, right, I've been asked to be explained, right? Right? I've asked to explain what are our answers to those who are against us, right? To those other religions and those other ideas, such as the philosophers and the Muslims, right? And the Christians. The Rambam would never have made such a statement, right? Because the Rambam actually, he didn't look at the philosophers as enemies, right? The Rambam actually used the philosophy and took the knowledge from the philosophers. Certainly, he pointed out his differences with them, right? But when he pointed out that we as Jews believe in a creator as opposed to the world olam kadmo and the world being eternal, etc. And but the Rambam also learned from the Islamic scholars, right? Those of us that studied the Moreh Nevuchim remember time after time after time, he would quote Islamic scholars in order to support ideas that he had. But then, of course, he showed where he differs from them, right? So the Rambam would never have looked at these different philosophies as counter, like, it's us versus them versus them versus them. The Rambam would have looked at all of those schools as schools from which we learn and then fuse together and find our path to the truth, right? Find the truth wherever you can find it. So right away, we understand a different approach. And we have to understand Rabbi Yehuda Halevi in the world that he's in. He's in a world where we have Muslims and Christians literally killing each other. We have some philosophers who are kind of aloof. They're doing their own thing, right? And then there's Jews caught in the middle of all of this. What's the Jewish way, right? And between you and me, right, there is a Jewish way. There is something unique and special that Jews have to say, that have to contribute to the conversation, that ad hayom hazeh, to this day in 2025, nobody cares except for the Jews, right? When was the last time, right, you actually heard people outside of Judaism that actually really, really wanted to know what the Jews actually have to say? There's so many people, they'll tell you, right, what the Jews say, but they don't actually talk to Jews and find out what Jews say. Nobody studies Jewish history except for Jews, right? Nobody cares about our impact in the world. Only we do, right? And this is something, it's a perpetual problem that has been from time immemorial, and probably, unfortunately, sadly enough, will probably always be the case. So here's Rabbi Yehuda Halevi calling out to the Jewish people, telling those that are going to read this book, this is what we believe, right? This is what makes us different from them. So he's already setting up a very different kind of path towards philosophy than the Rambam was setting up, right? The Rambam was teaching us how to fuse and draw from all these places to develop something, whereas Yehuda Halevi is showing us this is how we contrast. This is what makes us different, because we look at things this way and they look at things that way. So, and as we go through the book, we're going to see the points that he makes. And he makes a lot of very, very important points, and let's get to it. So, what was this dream that he had many times, the king of the Khazars? Shekaviyachol malach pone lava omerlo. It was as if in his dream it appeared to him that an angel turned to him and said, Kavanatcha ritzuya be'enei Elohim. Your intentions are good before the eyes of God. But your actions, your actions are not desired by God. In other words, God knows that your heart is good. God knows that you have the right intentions. You want to do but you're not doing the right thing. Now, right over here, we have really, these things are almost a key to the entire book. And you're going to see, as we study this book, you're going to understand what I mean more and more and more. But he summed up one of the major differences between Judaism and all of the other religions right here in this one sentence. I know that's a grand statement to make, but I'm going to back it up. So give me a shot, right? I'll tell you why that in that sentence, because what he's saying here is your intentions, right? Your thoughts are not enough. Your belief, your faith, right? I believe, fill in the blank, right? Whatever it might be, whether it's Jesus or Muhammad or you're a philosopher or whatever it is that you believe, that's not enough. Ma'asecha ein rutzuim, your actions, right? Right there, it encapsulates, right, a huge amount of what Rabbi Yehuda Levi is going to teach us, that Judaism is interested in what you do. This is such an incredibly crucial difference, and nobody understands. When was the last time you heard or read an article in a newspaper, somebody calling the Judaism a faith? Have you seen that? I've seen it hundreds of times, probably today, just looking in the newspaper. There's different faiths. Judaism would not define itself, and Rabbi Yehuda Levi would certainly not define Judaism as a faith. Not that Judaism doesn't have things that we believe. Of course, there are things that there are beliefs, there are ideas that are integral to our religion, but it's not a faith. It's ma'asecha. It's what you do. It's how you live your life. It's a way of life. It's a teaching that teaches us how we are supposed to live. So you can have all the faiths that you want. You can believe in this and believe in that and believe in the other thing and believe in all kinds of stuff. True things, false things, nonsense, craziness, doesn't matter. If you don't do, forget it. If you do, then maybe, okay, your faith might not be so great, but you're doing the right thing, you're okay. You're on the right path. So in this statement alone, you have Rabbi Yehuda Halevi telling us the key to the difference between us and them, right? So the king, the first king of Khazaria, his name historically, the one who actually converted, his name was Bulan. So this King Bulan, according to the legend, has a dream. Your idea is good, but your actions are no good. So hu haya mit'ametz ma'od lekayem et hamitzvot shebedat hakuzarim. He was trying very hard to do. It's known that the Khazars, before they converted to Judaism, they were pagans. They weren't yet. They lived in somewhere, I don't know, in the Caucasus mountain region someplace, and they were pagans. They hadn't yet converted to Islam and Christianity. They were being pressured, of course, by both sides. Both sides were trying to convert the pagans to them. And he was doing everything he could based on his own religion, whatever their pagan religion was, whatever gods they believed in. They had their rituals, and he was trying to do them. Ad kidei shahayahu atzmo misharet b'mikdash. He himself was doing the services in their pagan temples, right? Umakriv karbanos, and he was bringing sacrifices, b'kavono zako Torah, with all the pure intention, right? So Rabbi Yehuda Levi here is implicitly admitting and understanding that a person can go into a pagan temple and have the right intentions, right? He can go into a pagan and have the right thing. He could want to do the right thing, but still end up doing the wrong thing. He could have a desire to do the right thing, but when he's actually doing it, it's wrong. But in such a case, we have God coming down, so to speak, in a dream and intervening and saying, listen, you have the right idea. So let me straighten you out a little bit, right? So as the more he tried to keep doing these actions, he kept, what do I need to, maybe I need to do more sacrifices. Maybe I need to burn more incense. Maybe I need to say certain incantations better. Maybe I need to sing better. Maybe all the actions that he was doing in the pagan temple, he kept doing more. He would constantly come back at night and say, your intentions are good, but your actions are not good. So therefore, he decided that he now needs to go look into all the different religions of the world and see what's going on, right? So who's doing the right thing, right? Another little kernel that Yehuda Levi is laying down now is the idea that the actions that we do, the mitzvot that we do, are what God wants, right? God wants the actions that you and I do when we fulfill mitzvot in the Torah, as opposed to actions that other people might do, even if they're well-intended. They're still on the wrong path because they're doing the wrong actions, right? Now, that's not, could be a little controversial. Maybe yeah, maybe no, maybe you like the idea, maybe you don't like the idea. But it's certainly the idea that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is laying down now, and he's dropping little kernels. But as the book goes through, you're going to see how these kernels get developed into much broader ideas. Ulabasof hityahed. In the end of the story, we know that Bulan, the king, he became a Jew, right? Behuva tzibur Kuzarim. He, together with all of the Khazar citizenry, together decided to join the Jewish religion. So, bein ti'unav shel hechaver, among the answers that the chaver, the Jewish scholar, gave, hayu ka'ele sheshichnu oti. Some of them, right, meant a lot to me. They made sense to me. And they were fitting with my faith, with my own ideas. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says some of the things that I saw that the Jewish scholar told the king were things that made sense to me, and things that I agreed with, and things that I believe in too. So lachen chashavti lenachol nirshom hatiyanim ha'ela kafi shenitanu v'hamaskilim yavinu. So therefore, I decided that it would be a good idea to write down the ideas, the debates that went on back and forth, and those that understand will understand. Mesupar, it is told, so that's Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's very, very short introduction as to why he's writing, and he's going to write in a form of the ideas that the Chaver, we have letters from Rabbi Yehuda Halevi in his own hand, where he writes, that he was free. This was free association almost. Like, he didn't, no one, he didn't expect anyone to think that he was giving a historical account of what actually happened in that debate. There was nobody down there writing the minutes of the debate. And this is, but he had read, different ideas that were bounced around. So he's writing to us like an account of what could have been said back and forth, the point being, in order to tell us what do the Jews have to say about the subjects that we're going to bring up. So it's told that when the king of the Khazar saw in his dream that that his intentions are good, leilohim, to God, but his actions are not good. And so the angel that had appeared to him told him while he was asleep, so now it's your job to go out there and find out what you are supposed to do. How should you live your life? Right? What does God actually want us to do? How does God want us to live our lives? So the first thing he did was sha'al philosopher al emunaso. He asked a philosopher regarding his faith, right? Or his emuna, like, what do you believe? How do you see the world? And now we're about to read what the philosophers answer. For those of us that have studied in the last class Rambam, we're going to find this very, very easy, because the Neoplatonic philosophy and the Aristotelian philosophy, as it was processed by the Islamic scholars of the day, of this time in history, is what's going to be stated, and it's the same school of thought really that Rambam was exposed to, and you're going to hear a lot of what we learned then. But it's fine if you didn't study Rambam with us, you'll still enjoy this. I mean, it's still it's just a very brief summary of the philosophical ideas, the Neoplatonic / Aristotelian / Islamic scholars' version of Aristotle ideas of the day. So HaPhilosoph Amarlo, the philosopher, said to him as follows: Ein lelohim lo sviyut ratzon v'lo sina. God doesn't have his needs satisfied. He doesn't have any hatred or anger. Ki hu yisal nala me'al ratzonos v'amataros. He is above any desires or any goals, right? God doesn't even have goals. In other words, he doesn't have purposes. Hamataros moros, if a person has a goal or has an objective that they're trying to achieve, it shows al chesron matziva matros. It means that the person who is established that goal is missing something, right? You have a goal, right, to win a game of soccer, right? So you need to achieve that win by scoring goals, right? Before you score the goals, you're missing that win. So in other words, before you win the game, you're missing goals. You get the goals, now you win the game. So you're missing something beforehand, right? Your goal is, to make enough money to buy dinner tonight, right? Until then, you're missing dinner, right? Now, if God had goals for us, in other words, if he had or goals for the world, then he would be missing something. When a person fulfills the goal, that is shleimus, that is completeness for this person. And as long as he hasn't yet gotten it, now he's missing something. Similar, right? Lashitas hafilosophim, just like God doesn't have goals and God doesn't have desires and God doesn't have his desires filled, then he also, according to the philosophers, milodatas hapratim, he's above knowing the details. God doesn't know the details of what you and I are doing. He doesn't care what I had for dinner tonight. He doesn't care if you and I are sitting in this class learning Rabbi Levi, right? He doesn't know details, right? Because details change, right? And if God's knowledge changed, if tonight I had potato salad and tomorrow I have a sandwich, then God's knowledge changed, because last night he knew about one dinner and tomorrow he knows about it. So God doesn't change. So he doesn't bother with details like that, right? And God's knowledge never changes, right? So God doesn't know you. God doesn't care about Saul Weinreb. God knows about humanity. The idea, the concept of humanity doesn't change, right? He certainly doesn't know, and my cat seems to want to learn, but anyway, he certainly doesn't know what your intentions are and what your actions are, right? This dream, whatever your dream is in your dreams, but it's not God talking to you, because God doesn't care what you do, right? You can do a million sacrifices, you can do a million things. God doesn't care, right? He certainly doesn't listen to your prayers. He doesn't see your movements. He doesn't see what you do. Even though it's true that the philosophers do say that God is the creator, right? That's like a metaphor. They don't mean that God actually created anything. God is just what's often called in Aristotelian philosophy the prime mover, the ultimate thing that makes everything go and happen, right? Right? He's the main reason for existence, and he's the driver of all of existence, but he's not the creator. He never created humanity. The world is eternal. It has always existed, and we discussed this when Rambam told us about Aristotle, and Rambam, of course, refuted this idea of the eternity of the world, but that was what was believed then. The modern corollary to that, right, would be, and I told you this when we learned more Nevuchim, and that's important for us to understand now, is in those days, they thought they understood the laws of nature. They understood them the way Aristotle had explained them, right? Now, according to them, the laws of nature dictated that the world and the universe that we see in front of us should exist the way it exists, right? The laws of nature make it that this is what is, right? Whatever we see, when you look out your window and you see the world, that's the world that the laws of nature has created. Those laws of nature have always been and will always be the same laws. So if the world exists today because of the laws of nature, then logic would dictate that yesterday the same laws existed and the same thing existed, and then the day before that, and the day before that, and a million years before that, and a billion years before that, and a trillion years before that, the same laws would have produced the same result, right? And obviously nowadays modern science has shown that the universe has gone through massive change, and when we extrapolate backwards, we end up about 15 billion years into the Big Bang, which is very different from the world that we see around us today. It's a very different kind of universe, right? But the issue is that the modern corollary to the philosophical idea of the world is eternal is saying that the laws of nature are fixed. The laws of nature are the way they are because they have to be, and that's it, right? Now, nowadays, we understand the laws of nature differently. The laws of nature show us that the universe is expanding. So once upon a time, there must have been a Big Bang, right? But not because there's a God, not because there's a creator that decided that it should be that way. It's that way because it's that way, right? According to them, and now I'm continuing, human beings were always born of other human beings, and that human being had parents who were human beings who had parents who were human beings, and so on and so forth. Obviously, this was before the concept of evolution was understood, right? So the same laws of nature have always applied. Mitrakvot botzurot, right? And all of the forms, techunos, and all of the properties and midos and traits me'avivu me'imo mikrovav a person gets from his father and his mother and his relatives, and depending on the air that he breathes in the land that he's living in, haratzos, and the kind of land that he lives on, hamizonos, and the kind of food, and the minamayim, and the kind of water he drinks, yachadim kochot hagalgalim, together with the spheres that are rotating around the universe. Remember, in their astronomy, they had spheres rotating, kochvei haleches, and these shooting stars, which also in their they understood to influence who we are and our behavior, v'mazalos, and the constellations, and all the relationships that happen between them. All of those things influence and make each one of us who we are. So if you knew all of those laws of nature, you would know exactly why Saul Weinreb is Saul Weinreb, and you know exactly why I'm sitting here tonight giving this lecture, and it would all make sense because it's all a result of the laws of nature and the laws of science. Hakol novea min hasiba rishona, everything goes back to the first beginning, the first cause. Lo mitoch shezos matrasa, not because God, for so to speak, had a goal. He wanted to see a world in which X, Y, Z will happen, right? It's just that there was an emanation that came. There was a first cause, which caused the second cause, which causes a third cause, which causes a fourth cause, and eventually causes number 755 billion, which ends up in me sitting here tonight, right? It keeps on going. But they are necessary. They're laws of nature. So A plus B will always equal C, plus D will always equal E, plus F will always equal G, so on and so forth. Those are the laws, and that will always be the result, right? The laws of science will always, if you understand the laws of science, then you will be able to know exactly what is happening, when, why, where, and what. You just need to know all the rules, right? And this is not changed. I mean, the modern scientists will tell you the same thing, right? If we understood exactly everything about the brain and know exactly how we make decisions and so on and so forth, we could predict exactly what you're going to do. But obviously, there's so many variables that we can't predict it. But if we knew everything, somehow we'd be able to do so, right? But everything has always been, and it's been eternal, just like the first cause, which is God, has always been. In every single detail that is in this world that surrounds us, right, there are causes and there are ways in order to reach full fulfillment, right? So what he's going to say here is that the laws of nature dictate that all of us aren't complete, right? We all have work to do, right? Every existence, every creature has a job, right? We have to fulfill something. Right? If all of the various causes that surround that person, if they're all complete, if a person fulfills them completely, that person will be complete. But if you have a specific person who is of locos that has some flaws in those surrounding influences, he will be not complete. He will be missing something. And here, it's interesting. There's a translation in the Korobkin translation where he translates it as a Kushite, which is which basically, I mean, this is going to sound very racist, but it's just the way they thought in those days. So it's not me speaking; it was them. A Kushite meaning they looked at a person who was black, from Africa, as someone who was less, because they looked at them as primitive. They were pagans. They didn't have religion. They were primitive. They weren't smart. They weren't educated, right? But actually, in the modern Hebrew, the scholarly translation translated as a Chabashi, which is not really a Kushite, which is really a name for a savage. I say savage. I know that sounds like I'm a English colonist from the 17th century, but that's I deliberately use that word. In other words, a primitive person, right? Asher lohu chan liyoser me'asher kabbalah suras adam, who is not really, all he has is the form and shape of a person, v'aseichel b'ofen alakoi, but his mind is not developed in the way as much as it could be or as much as it should be. So that person, maybe has the capability, but he's not. He doesn't have the education, so he's more primitive. Philosopher, but if you're a philosopher, in other words, you're educated, that all the preparations were done. In other words, the education, that person will then have all the great physical advantages. He'll know how to live a better life. As malasa ofi, as malasa iunus v'amasios, he'll know how to analyze things and understand things, and he'll know how to act. He will be complete as a human being. But if a person has potential completeness, right, in order to bring it out from just potential and make it actual, you need to teach, you need to learn, you need education. Through these things, all of the properties that a person has and skills that a person has will become revealed. There's all sorts of levels in between. You can make it to the top, or you could not, or you could be at any level in between, depending on your education. So basically, the reason why the philosopher is telling him this is he's telling him, so how do you live a good life? You want to make yourself, educate yourself on truth, educate yourself in philosophy, educate yourself in how to live, and then you'll be perfect, right? But Adam hasholem davak or mimin eloki hakore hasechel. Okay, so he's about to go into the active intellect, which we also heard a lot about when we studied the Rambam, but I don't want to stop here yet, but I do want to give a little bit of commentary, and that is that remember that everything Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is saying here is laying the groundwork for what he's going to tell us Judaism is not, right? So when he tells us that God isn't interested in what we do, the reason why he's telling us that is because when he talks about Judaism, he's going to tell us that God is interested in what we do, right? When he's telling us that the philosopher tells us that God doesn't respond to our prayers or doesn't respond to our actions, he's going to tell us when the Jew speaks that God does respond to our actions, right? That we get punished or rewarded based on how we live and what we do, right? When he tells us about, God is not a creator, it's just a metaphor, it's because Judaism teaches us that God is a creator and did create the universe. So understand that as we learn the philosopher, he's not just giving us a summary of philosophers. He's giving us a summary of what the philosophers say that we disagree with, right? So remember, if he wanted to write a book on Aristotelian philosophy, I'm sure he probably could have. But this is not a book on Aristotelian philosophy. This is a book on the ideas that he plans on refuting when he gives us the Jewish approach. So just bear that in mind as we learn all of this. And virtually every paragraph that he says here is a paragraph that at some point later on in the book, he's going to rip apart and say, but according to the Judaism, according to us, it's different. So what is it? So in Ba'adam Hashalim, in this complete person, I'm continuing, the person who has achieved this great level, Dovak or Mimin Eloki, there is a light, which is a godly kind of light, or a godly kind of spirit, Hakari Aseichel Apol, which is called the active intellect. Now, remember, Rambam understood the active intellect as the connection between us and God. It's where God's presence is within us as human beings, right? We studied that in Rambam a lot. So in what Yehuda Halevi is about to say about what the Seichel HaPoel is, which Yehuda Halevi does not really buy that as part of Judaism. Remember, Rambam kind of did. So you see here another strong difference between the two of them. So what is this Seichel HaPoel, this active intellect? Sichlo hanifal davek bo dveko shelis achtos, right? That is his mind, right? Is attached in this unity, and connected. And the person who is complete is completely part of his active intellect. He and his intellect have become one, right? Such that Klomar Evarav Shel Sodom, his body becomes almost meaningless, right? His bones, his limbs, Lo Yasku Ela B'Masam Hashleimim B'Yoser, they naturally only do the things that are proper according to his active intellect, right? B'Yizmanim Hamatimim B'Yoser, at the right times, V'Matzavim Ha'om Yoser, and in the right opportunities. Heim Kiviyachol Kalim L'Seichel HaPoal, his body becomes just a utensil for his active intellect, which is doing everything exactly the way it should be according to the truth, right? Lo l'seichel hachamri, he's not acting based on what his physical mind, which is occupied by his physical desires and so on, but rather hanifal, which is acted upon, right? That's the part of our mind which senses things, sees things, feels things, wants things, right? Asher hifil osam kodem lochein. Are you able to hear me? My AC just went on. Is everyone able to hear me still? Is it okay? Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Az haya kolea leitim umachti leitim v'zeh kolea tamid. Right. Because the physical intellect is on and off. Right. It happens sometimes. It makes you do bad things, etc. So this is the ultimate goal that a complete and whole person hopes for and strives for. He's gotten rid of doubt. He knows the truth. He's got it. He will acquire all sorts of knowledge for their truth, right? And he will become he'll become like an angel. Right, an angel who's purely motivated only by doing the right thing. His soul will reach the angelic level, but the lowest level of angels, angels being those intelligences that are separated from physical bodies. And we had that concept in the Rambam as well. That is the level of this active intellect. It's like an angel, which is slightly lower than the intelligence, the angel that runs the lowest of the spheres, which is the sphere within which the moon is embedded. These are intelligences that have no physical existence. They are original, just like they are eternal, just like God is eternal. They never worry. They have a permanence that lives for all time. They don't have to worry about being destroyed. The soul of such a person and that active intellect become as one. Life is sweet to him. He's now entered the group of people such as Hermes, Aesculapius, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Right? This is the example of the philosophers that have reached that level. Yisrael is also even more than that. He is at one in existence with all of the philosophers that have reached that level. This is what people mean or what is meant when it is stated satisfying God's desire, right? Doing God's will. Really what they mean, according to the philosopher, is this. It doesn't mean that God wants us to do something because he has a goal. He needs something to get done. So he asks us he needs the laundry done. So he says, go do the laundry, and you go do it. No, that's not what it is, right? It doesn't mean, it means bakesh zos efo, bakesh ladas amitas advarim. Always seek the truth, know this, so that your active intellect should reach that level where it is doing the action as opposed to being acted upon. Something that is acted upon is something that responds to physical stimuli that are around us. The goal of the philosopher is not to react to the stimuli that are around us, but rather to act. Attach yourself to the ways that are more appropriate in the character traits and in your actions. Why? Why should you be good in this world? Why should you do the right thing? Because that helps you find the truth. So that you should be diligent in your studies. So that you should be just like the active intellect. And as a result of this, you'll be able to be satisfied with small amount. You won't need to be rich. You won't need to work hard to have a bigger house and a nicer car. Shiflus ruach, you'll be humble. Right? Just like the first intellect, meaning the prime mover, which is God. You're not doing this because you want God to be happy with what you're doing. Or not because you don't want God to be angry with you, but rather because you want to be like that active intellect, because what matters is the truth. Because this is how you describe the intellect. Now, for those of us, I'm going to stop for a second. For those of us that studied Rambam, know and understand, it wouldn't be true if I said that this is exactly the way Rambam understands our job in the world and what the Torah wants from us. But I would say it would be accurate to say that the Rambam kind of teaches a very, very almost exactly the same as what this philosopher has stated here. And it's not coincidental. Remember, Yehuda Halevi is going against that idea, and he's presenting this as the idea of the philosophers, right? Rambam took all of these ideas, he gave a little Torah spin on it, but for the most part, this is very similar to the way Rambam understood our job in this world. I'm not going to go into all the detail; it would take a long time, but you know, for those that studied it, they'll probably know what I mean. And for those that haven't, I advise that you go back and listen to the 138 lectures we had on Rambam. But don't worry, if you didn't and you don't want to, that's fine too. You can just learn and study Yehuda Halevi. I don't want to scare you away. Trust me, there's plenty to learn here. So I don't want to scare you away. But let me continue. I would like to finish. I have 9 more minutes left, and I can finish at least the philosopher's speech without... I don't think we're going to get to the response to the philosopher, but we can at least finish what the philosopher has to say. Because this is your faith now, because this is what you believe, in other words, assuming that you accept me, the philosopher says, King Bulan, right? And assuming that you decide to take my path, Al tasim leiv ezo Torah, don't pay any attention, don't care which Torah you're going to follow, atamekabel al atzmecho, be'ezo dat, or which religion, right? Atamamin you're going to believe in. Ve'ezo elokus atamaritz, and which God you're going to worship. Uve'ezo amira, and which incantation, which statement you're going to make. You know, remember that, like the what's it called? The Shahada, whatever, the statement of Islamic faith, or the Christians have, you know, whatever. Uve'ezu lashon, or what language you have to say it in. Uve'elu masim atamamin, or which actions are going to be the magic actions that are going to get you to whatever heaven you're trying to get to. Oh, b'deilecha das le'inyan ha'nava, right? Right. You don't have to you don't have to worry about all this stuff. Don't pay any attention to that. That's all nonsense, right? You know, you're much more. You're in a totally different planet. You're seeking truth, right? That's it. None of these religions do you have to really worry about. Just forget about it. Don't bother with that. Or if you want to, go ahead, choose a path. So some religion, make yourself your own religion, right? If you want, whatever, right? Just make it one in which humility is important. Ha'arotza v'yashevach, right? Something that you can use so that the people will praise you, and you can run your country this way, right? And your house, right? Oh, if people will accept you. Or if you want to Make the religion philosophy. Make that your religion. Shechibruna filosofim v'tiena hitkavnuscha umatroscha zoch nafshecha. And then your intentions and the goals that you seek truth. That will be your the purity of your soul. Sikumo shel davar. At the bottom line of all of this, bakes zoch halev. What you want to look for is purity of heart. In any way that you can. After you achieve intellectual understanding of the true ideas, then you will achieve your goal. To attach yourself to the spiritual concept, which is the active intellect. Maybe you'll have prophecy, and you will find hidden wisdom, in true dreams, and as opposed to the dream that you had, and other ideas that bring you closer to truth. So this is the philosopher's presentation. As we go through this, we're going to then hear from the Christian, and we're going to hear from the Muslim. I might have that in the wrong order, but it doesn't matter. So the Kuzar, the king of the Khazars, tonight we studied and read the response that he got from the philosophers. And now what we should be thinking now is Yehuda Levi, and we're going to get back to this, right? We should be thinking now, how did Rabbi Yehuda Levi present the ideas of the philosophers? Bear it in mind, because when he presents the ideas of Judaism, it's going to be a contrast, and you're going to see it, right? It's similar to when he brings out the Christian path and the Muslim path. The Jewish path is going to be different than all three, right? So we have a few minutes for questions, comments, etc. But I do want to ask: are you following along in the Korupkin translation? Most people, are you able to kind of do that? All right. I know it might be a little confusing.
From time to time, there seems to be a few sentences or paragraphs you're saying that I couldn't find the equivalent, but generally did go with the flow.
Generally, you've been able to do it. Okay. It's all right. So now I'm okay. So I'm going to open the floor. We have a few minutes for questions. So fire away.
It seems to me like it's a little more paraphrasing what you're saying than reading all the words, because of the difference in the translation. And I have the same book that you do, but I'm following along. In fact, almost like I could not read the book and listen to you and get the point.
Riva, I could hear what you're saying, but it's very soft. It's very low, the volume.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I forgot. Much better. Okay.
I forgot to. I have my work. I'm on my work computer and my work headset. Okay. No, this is my first class. I didn't do the Maimonides with you guys, Ramban, but almost like I didn't have to highlight anything in the book or follow along. I could, and I could find where you were. It was pretty different, I think, than the English, what you were saying to what was the English translation, but I was able to follow.
You were able to follow. Along. Okay, good. Are there any other questions, comments?
How do you spell Korobkin? Because I've been looking for it.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Korobkin, the person who translated.
Yeah.
How do you spell it? With a K or a C?
A K. Korobkin, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Korobkin. Yeah, he does a very good job. But like I said, I'm trying. I want to get as close to the to the original as possible without having to spend the next 10 years of my life studying medieval Judeo-Arabic, which is, it would be wonderful to know, but it's not exactly a skill I'm going to spend that much time on.
This is the book that he recommended, Yosef.
Yeah. And if there's any other comments or questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, we'll just get ready for next week.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that what the philosophers are saying is sort of what Rambam said at the end. I mean, he said basically you have to develop your intellect, you have to develop a way to approach God, but the philosopher's not talking about God, he's talking about truth and becoming a person that's superior intellectually. And the difference, I think, is Rambam was saying, you do all of this so you can get close to God, and by doing all these things, you're closer to God and closer to, understanding the awe and the love that you have of God, as opposed to philosopher who's just saying this develops you into a person that, is, more, is closer to an intellectual mind or soul rather than just a common respond to life sort of person.
Yeah.
Did I get that right? Is that sort
Yeah,
of
you did. And that's kind of what I meant when I said it's not exactly the same as what Rambam taught, but it's very, very close. And you can see how Rambam took these philosophical ideas that were around in those days and developed a theory of Judaism that incorporated that wisdom. Whereas Yehuda Halevi is presenting it as another path, right?
Yeah.
And we'll see how, and that's really crucial. And that's something that all the scholars, that analyze this book, all analyze it. I mean, the contrast to the Rambam is glaring. It's interesting how, but that's why I chose to study this after Mor Nevuchim, because I want everyone to learn that contrast, because that contrast, those two paths reverberate literally to this day in Judaism, right? And we'll see as we go through it, we'll understand. But I think you kind of hit it on the nail there. Any other questions before we close up?
Just one thing, I'm appreciative of you talking about the difference and stuff, because I did not participate in the Mora
Nevuchim. Yeah, you're not the only one. There are some others here that weren't, so you're not alone.
So when you talk about it, it helps when you say, okay, this and that, so we can see the contrast.
Yeah, good.
So
I'm glad you said that, because I was afraid that I was making people feel left out. So I'm glad you said that.
I want you to keep doing that.
All right,
so
good.
for us,
I will. I can't help it. I have to. But either way, have a wonderful evening, everyone. I really appreciate everyone for joining. Looking forward to next Wednesday to continue. Next Wednesday, we will hear the king of the Khazar's response to the philosopher, and we'll have a good time. All right, have a wonderful night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Saul.
Thank you very much.
Bye. All right.